The story begins with a woman named Ava, who works at an art gallery owned by a man named Eugene. Ava recently broke up with her fiancé and is now fully focused on her work. Knowing that Ava has already paid for her honeymoon, Eugene suggests that she go on the trip alone, as it could be a great opportunity for her to meet new people. He also assures her that she doesn't need to worry about her job since there are no upcoming art exhibitions planned. The scene then shifts to the kingdom of Baldonia, where we see Prince of Baldonia and a royal servant named Reynold. The prince has a deep love for art and owns a famous painting called The Bring, created by the modern artist Tobias. Later, the prince meets with his family. His father, King Cal, is angry that he received a traffic ticket and starts discussing his future as the next king. Meanwhile, his mother, Queen Mara, plans to arrange his marriage to Princess Gudrun of the Kingdom of Denmark. Since the prince dislikes this idea, his father orders him to leave the palace for a while to think about his future. Fortunately, Reynold has an old friend who is the captain of a cruise ship that will soon be traveling through several European cities via the Danube River. However, the prince's brother, Max, is worried that he won't be able to keep his identity a secret. Reynold reassures him that he'll make arrangements with the ship's captain, and the king grants the prince permission to go on the trip. A few days later, Ava arrives in Germany to embark on her solo cruise vacation. On the ship, she meets the cruise manager, Teddy, who is curious as to why she is traveling alone, especially since she booked a honeymoon suite. Teddy then goes to get help from one of the crew members and hands Ava a tablet. Meanwhile, the prince also arrives on the ship and mistakes Ava for a reception staff member. At that moment, Ava tells him that he looks somewhat familiar, but Reynold arrives just in time and takes him to his cabin. Because the prince has a distinctive beard, he asks Reynold to help him shave it off. Reynold is concerned about keeping the prince's identity hidden, so the prince comes up with an idea and asks Reynold to call him Joe. That evening, Reynold invites Joe to dinner to meet the ship's captain, who is aware that Joe's identity must be kept secret. The captain also invites Ava to dinner, along with a woman named Betty, who has taken this cruise 10 times before. During the meal, Joe, who is seated next to Ava, realizes that she is actually a passenger and not a reception staff member. Joe then explains that he has an interest in art and is collecting pieces belonging to the royal family to sell them at a charity auction. The next day, when the ship docks in a city, Ava meets Joe again and tells him that she is from Chicago. She also mentions that she works at an art gallery, which leads Joe to invite her to explore the city with him. While they are having lunch, Joe becomes curious about why a beautiful woman like Ava is traveling alone. Ava eventually admits that she left her fiancé, and since she had already paid for the trip, she came at the request of her boss. In this conversation, Joe explains that he is from the Kingdom of Baldonia and had a disagreement with his father. He doesn't reveal that he is a prince and falsely says that his father has always pressured him to take his place and run the family business as CEO. When they return to the ship, Joe tells Ava that she is a woman who is easy to connect with. A few moments later, Reynold approaches them and, after Ava leaves, asks Joe if he plans to tell her his true identity. The next day, the ship docks in the Kingdom of Baldonia. Teddy decides to invite Ava on a tour of the royal palace. Meanwhile, Joe claims that he has read a book about the palace and can provide interesting information about hidden doors and royal family stories. While they are touring, Reynold comes to see Joe again and tells him that he needs to select a painting for the charity auction. Ava seems interested in seeing these paintings as well. Joe then takes her to a room in the basement to show her some artwork. Joe selects one of the paintings for the auction. When they return to the ship, Ava talks to Teddy about Joe. She is a bit suspicious of Joe's behavior, but Teddy reassures her that they make a great couple. Meanwhile, King Cal and Prince Max are in regular contact with Reynold to stay updated on Joe's situation and his efforts to collect artwork. Reynold is upset about Joe lying to Ava. Still curious, Joe asks Ava how she ended her engagement. Ava explains that her fiancé never truly loved her. Joe eventually tries to comfort Ava. The next day, the ship arrives in a city called Linz, famous for its museums and art galleries. By coincidence, this city is home to an artist named Tobias. As a fan of Tobias, Ava finally reaches his apartment with Joe after a long journey. They enter the apartment, and after meeting Tobias, Ava suggests that he showcase his paintings at Eugene's gallery. She then leaves her business card so Tobias can contact her. Learning that Tobias had painted the bring, Ava asks him to whom he sold the painting, as it is very famous in Europe. Tobias recalls that the painting was purchased by an aristocratic couple as a wedding gift. However, since Joe was the one who handled the purchase, he remains silent to protect his identity. While they are having lunch, Ava suddenly receives a message from Tobias about the painting the bring. In the message, Tobias mentions that he sold the painting to a man whose family reportedly owns a jewelry store in Vienna. Meanwhile, elsewhere, Reynold is speaking with the ship's captain, complaining about Joe getting closer to Ava and the lies Joe is telling Ava about his identity. Reynold says that King Cal might get upset about this, but as his subordinate, he can't interfere with royal matters or with the prince's romantic affairs. A while later, the captain and Teddy decide to organize a painting competition for the ship's passengers. Surprisingly, Reynold and Betty are announced as the winners. Since Prince Joe doesn't want Ava to be disappointed, he decides to take her somewhere special. That evening, they arrive at a restaurant where Joe invites Ava to dinner with soft music playing in the background. Ava never expected the moment to be so romantic, and when Joe asks her to dance, they both feel that they have fallen in love with each other. The next day, the ship finally reaches Vienna, and Ava immediately takes Joe to a jewelry store. When they arrive, Ava promptly asks the shopkeeper who bought the painting the bring. Ava then takes pictures of the images of Joe's brother, Max, and his wife, Catherine, displayed in the store. While looking at the rings, a woman suddenly films them and overhears Ava's joke about planning to marry Joe. After leaving the store, Ava searches the internet and becomes certain that Joe's brother, Max, bought the bring. As always, Joe refuses to comment, not wanting to reveal that Max is his younger brother. Later that night, Max unexpectedly visits Prince Joe to discuss his vacation with him. In that moment, Joe talks about his closeness to Ava and expresses concern about Ava's possible reaction when she finds out he is a prince. Following Reynold's advice, Max urges him to reveal his true identity and introduce Ava to their family. But Joe says he's not ready to do that yet. The next day, Joe and Ava visit another royal palace to make a request for donating paintings. However, Joe is unsure about which paintings to choose, so he asks Ava to help him select one. When they go to another room, they see more famous paintings, creating a romantic atmosphere between them. Meanwhile, Joe realizes that he has received several messages from his brother, informing him that news about his engagement to Ava has been published. When Joe returns to the ship, he decides that he will tell Ava the truth. However, before doing so, he needs to go back to the palace since his father had asked him to meet him as soon as possible. Briefly, when Joe meets with his father, he apologizes and tells him that he wants to invite Ava to a party at the palace. Initially, King Cal is worried because Ava is from a common background. Ultimately, she agrees. Meanwhile, Betty, who had heard the news from the media, goes to meet Reynold to get an explanation. However, Betty didn't know that Ava was getting close to them, and Ava reads the news from the media before Joe can explain it. Ava is very upset because of the news. That night, Reynold secretly helps Joe to explain the situation to Ava, but unfortunately, she's too disheartened and refuses to listen to Joe's explanation. The next day, the ship arrives at its final destination in Budapest, Hungary. There, Joe apologizes to Ava again, telling her that she is the first woman he feels comfortable with. To prove his sincerity, Joe decides to invite Ava to the party at the palace and introduce her to his family. However, Ava cannot trust Joe again. Since news of their breakup reached the palace, Joe's sister-in-law Catherine comes up with an idea to bring them back together later that evening. Teddy admits to Ava that he also wants to apologize, as he knew the truth about Joe's identity. A few moments later, the ship's staff delivers an invitation letter from Catherine, inviting Ava to the party at the palace. Interestingly, Catherine had prepared several party dresses for Ava and wrote a note, hoping Ava would accept her invitation. The next day, the royal family hosts a grand party at the palace, and Reynold invites Betty to the event as well. At this time, Catherine asks Joe to go and greet Ava. Joe then gets the chance to introduce Ava to his family. During this meeting, Joe asks Ava to dance with him and requests that she stay in Baldonia so they can have a serious relationship. Additionally, Joe has a special gift for Ava. He shows her Tobias's painting the Bring. He tells Ava that Max and Catherine gave them the painting as a gift, and the film ends here.